Welcome to One-on-One. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. It's a big day here at PAC 14. We have a state senator in the House, our first broadcast guest ever many years ago, Senator Mary Beth Carozza. Welcome, Mary Beth.
Well, thank you, Greg. Thanks for having me back. And as I will point out, I'm back, and it's less than a month since session is let out. So you are one of my first stops.
Well, it was a busy session. It's an election year. Lots of things happened, up and down, surprises. So tell me, what's your takeaway from what just happened in Annapolis?
It was a very grueling session, especially during a campaign year. And I really have tried to capture this session, 2022, as the highlights, the lowlights, the unusual, and the unexpected. And by that, I have pretty good examples in each category, but it's always great to start with the highlights. And I have to say, after working together with Governor Hogan for 8 years, the retiree tax relief that finally came through this session was welcome and very much needed. And it was a lot of satisfaction because I think back to literally the door-to-door starting in 2013 and having seniors, whether in Ocean Pines or Wicomico, Worcester at the time when I was a delegate, literally tell me that we have to make Maryland more tax friendly, that they have options, and indeed they do, to go right over the line in Delaware.
You hear that all the time.
Down south.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the seniors, it was the families thinking down the road and preparing for their retirement, and they were doing their planning. So when you hear that day in and day out, house in and house out, it became a priority, and it was always one of Governor Hogan's top priorities. And I give him a lot of credit because he would sponsor a retiree tax relief bill every single year of session and really push it with the leadership. And fortunately this year, with everything coming together, with the budget surplus, with the focus on it, and the negotiations with the Speaker of the House and the Senate President, that we were able to secure this retiree tax relief.
So what does it do exactly? If I'm a retiree, what can I look for?
So you're looking for, if you make $100,000 and less as an individual, you are eligible for that tax credit, which averages about $1,000. And then as a couple, it's up to $150,000. So I think it's about $1,250 for that tax credit. We really want to do more down the road, but we think this is certainly a start, and we'll continue to press for more relief.
Interesting. What other ups were passed that you liked?
Well, this one I'd also like to give one of my colleagues in the Eastern Shore delegation credit. It's the highway user formula. And to have those increases to the formula, which means more money will be back to the local jurisdictions. And the reason that is so important, number one, we need to increase the formulas so we can fund our local projects, but it also brings some certainty to scheduling our projects of priority. For example, for many years in Worcester County, the top priority was finishing Route 113 from Delaware all the way down to Pocomoke. And that was a priority going back to Governor Ehrlich, and Governor Hogan came in and kept the commitment to finish that project. But now in Worcester County, the priorities has shifted to Route 90, Route 589. So now that we know that the funding formula will be more generous to the local jurisdictions, that bodes well for keeping some of our priority projects on track. And I also have to say that this has been a top priority for the Maryland Municipal League. For the entire time that I've served as both delegate and a state senator, I represent 11 municipalities in 3 of my counties that I represent. So I'm really glad to see that this session we were able to move forward with an increase in that formula.
Yeah, the highway fund was decimated during the recession, and basically the state just didn't send the money down. So it was up to the local governments to pay entirely for road maintenance and repairs. And I know in Wicomico it was really hard.
Really hard. And as a matter of fact, so that money was supposed to go to the locals, and it was rated going back to the O'Malley years, taken and put in the general fund instead of specifically, for the highway user revenue fund. So now, after all these years chipping away, trying to get the increases, but have the funding formula actually increase, bodes well for these projects locally.
Now 113 is finished now, right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And that's why when it came to the next priority, there had to be a consensus within Worcester County to determine what that priority might be. And it really is now a combination of Route 90 and for safety issues, evacuation issues, and also tied to 589 with all the growth in Ocean Pines as well.
Right. And not to get in the weeds on this, but Route 90 always impressed me when they developed that, when they planned it. The right-of-ways are already there to expand that highway.
They have done some good planning there, but I can tell you after attending a meeting about a couple weeks ago with the Worcester County Commissioners, they really want to see the state make a more definite commitment to Route 90. And there is pressure on right now, and I, of course, will be partnering with the county commissioners and working with the state to keep the pressure to move forward with that as a priority.
Our local Chamber of Commerce and small businesses were concerned about the paid family leave legislation, which did pass.
Well, let me give you a little bit of background on that because, as a matter of fact, Bill Chambers from the Salisbury Area Chamber of Commerce, as well as Mike Dunn from the Greater Salisbury Committee, I arranged for a meeting for them to meet with the Senate President early in the session so they could voice their concerns about the paid family leave bill. In the fact that here these businesses are just, recovering from the pandemic, and that you're talking about putting this additional expense on them. And in that initial meeting, we actually thought that they may delay moving forward with the paid family leave and not do it this session. Unfortunately, there was a lot of pressure, and it did come from the progressive left to move forward with the paid family leave this session. And what was very frustrating about this bill is that there were no details.
Right.
So they wanted to rush the bill through mainly because they wanted to have enough time that when the governor vetoed it, it would go back and they could override the veto this session. So in that rush to send that bill to the governor and to override his veto, none of the details were worked out. This ends up being, a payroll tax on employers and employees. So when some of us stood up on the Senate floor and tried to ask some basic questions about the details, what is the cost share between the employers and the employees? They couldn't answer those questions. As a matter of fact, some of the proponents of the legislation, when it came back from the House side, actually called it a hot mess. With that said, they still rushed through and they passed it. The reason we spent so much time on that bill during the Salisbury Chamber of Commerce Forum is that we are going to have to go back and do targeted fixes to this bill. And we are going to have to work hard during the interim. So I have vowed to work with the leadership of the Salisbury Area Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Salisbury Committee, with our business leaders to talk and work through these issues during the interim. So when we go back into session in 2023, that we can at least make whatever adjustments we need to so it's, at least workable.
Right. Another hot button issue for them was the climate change legislation, which passed. We don't really know what it's going to do, but the people on the environmental side are kind of declaring victory. People on the let's be reasonable side are wondering what the results are going to be. Where were you through that debate?
So that bill, the climate change bill, came through my committee, Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee. And when it was first introduced, it was far more onerous. We worked very hard in committee because the original legislation had a ban on natural gas. So that they basically wanted to go all electric and ban natural gas, which, as you know, we have worked so hard for over 25 years to finally bring natural gas to Somerset County.
Yeah.
And here they were talking about banning it in this legislation. And I want to give credit to Somerset County Commission President Craig Mathias for personally coming up and testifying and educating the members of my committee on, how devastating that would have been to keep that provision in there. And with a lot of input from my district, and again, I want to thank all of those who were engaged. The chambers, Salisbury, all of my chambers were engaged. Having, the commission president come up in person. working with Chesapeake Utilities to make the case that you can't ban natural gas in this legislation. So fortunately, we were able to remove that provision. But with that said, it is still very onerous across the board. And I did vote against it for those reasons. I believe that you can reach a lot of these goals, but involve other players and not go all electric. And so that was my reason for opposing the bill.
Yeah, and in Somerset, essentially, it's an economic development issue for natural gas.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, to know that for over 25 years that it's been a priority for the Economic Development Commission there to have them work so hard to move forward. I mean, it was just last year that we were in front of the Board of Public Works to make sure that we could finally go through with it. So then you turn around and have legislation introduced in the 22 session that would ban our efforts there to provide natural gas. And I also want to point out those that were promoting this ban on natural gas, all of their counties already have natural gas.
Exactly.
You know, so when you have the Montgomery counties and the Prince George's counties and those counties, you know, across the bridge, basically trying to dictate our way of life, we're going to push back. And in this case, we were able to have, you know, a minor victory on that bill, even though we did move forward with the climate change bill.
Yeah, and perhaps in communities where the population is a little more concentrated, that some of the green technology might work better than in a rural area.
Well, that's right. And, you know, again, you know, we already had aggressive goals on reducing emissions before this climate change bill. So, you know, now we've, you know, raised the stakes even higher. Not sure how we're going to meet all of those goals. And I'm not sure how Maryland's effort really will make an overall effect when you talk about climate change, how it affects us as a nation. So, you know, I'm very concerned that it's our ratepayers, our taxpayers that end up paying the bill on this, and I'm not really sure what the result will be.
I didn't see as much coverage as I expected on the marijuana legislation, so I kind of lost track of what all that means. So there's going to be a referendum?
There is going to be a referendum, and some of us opposed the going forward with the recreational adult use of marijuana because we're still in the midst of an opioid crisis.
Right.
And it didn't make a lot of sense to some of us to move forward in that area. Also, we just now are moving forward with the legalization of medical cannabis and putting that business infrastructure in place. So, you know, we barely have that up and running. Now we're moving forward on a referendum to have, you know, legalized use, recreational use of marijuana, and during the midst of an opioid crisis. And I also will point out the whole issue of, you know, public smoking of marijuana on the boardwalk has continued to be an issue. So we try to make sure that there were penalties in the legislation that passed that you know, would have increased penalties for you know, the use of smoking marijuana in public spaces. That has continued to be an issue, not just for the boardwalk, but it's very prominent there when you advertise Ocean City as a family resort, and yet you can walk down the boardwalk and you can smell marijuana, and you know it's probably coming from the beach or coming you know, from the street area or somewhere on the boardwalk. So again, I would classify that as a low light. But I do want to go back to a couple other highlights.
Sure, go ahead, I'm sorry.
When we talk about the two that we mentioned, the Retiree Tax Relief, we talk about the increased formula for the highway user funds that will benefit us on the shore. There were a couple other shore bills that I didn't anticipate working on, but they came to my attention right before session started, and it was a couple bills working with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And one of them is a shrimp fishery bill. And in the 2021 session, the Maryland Department of Natural Resources had a bill that it was allowing the commercial fishing to go forward with shrimp fishery. And a lot of people, a lot of my colleagues, and I'm finding out a lot of my constituents don't know that, no, you don't have to go to South Carolina for a shrimp fishery. We actually have it in our coastal waters here. And Sunny Gwynn from West Ocean City came up this year in the 2022 session and testified in support of my bill, which would basically put a framework in place to go forward with the shrimp fishery, what the rules and regulations would be. And I also want to give credit to the chairman of the Watermen's Caucus, Delegate Jay Jacobs. He was the House sponsor, and his bill went all the way through. It was the same, our bill together went through. And so this is exciting because I think it opens up some more options for the commercial fishing industry here on the shore. And the other bill, and it's the first time I've worked this closely with the Maryland Forest Association, we moved forward with a bill, it was basically a firewood treatment certification bill. And the reason this was important is the feds used to do the certification, basically looking at the pest issue with the firewood and doing the certifications necessary for some of our forest producers to be able to export their products to other states. The feds came back this year and said, we're not going to do this certification program anymore. The Maryland Forest Association came to us and came to the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and said, we don't have anything in place at the state level to certify this process. So we really had to work very quickly before session on a bill that successfully moved forward. And again, it was great to have representatives of the Maryland Forest Association testify. And as you know, that's a very important industry to the shore.
Yeah, it's an essential industry, and it's one that people don't even think about.
Exactly. So those were two wins, and it also gave me an opportunity to really utilize my position on my committee to move those bills forward.
I thought it was great that you took the time to recognize a guy who's kind of a local hero, the man who jumped off the Route 90 bridge to rescue the baby. Tell us about that.
So Jonathan Bauer, back in 2021, although he was recognized this session, you talk about the actions of a hero. So here he was literally driving on the Route 90 bridge, and this horrendous accident unfolds in front of him, and he was driving with his daughter. And he literally sees, this pickup truck, hanging halfway, over the bridge. He stops, he makes sure his daughter is okay because from the collision, glass actually shattered in on them. He made sure his daughter was okay. He had her stay there. He ran to the scene to see how he could be helpful. And again, here's somebody who works for Atlantic General Hospital, stepping up and as a citizen running to the scene of danger. And he sees that when he gets to the scene of the accident and sees the driver, the driver, obviously the father being very distraught, sees that, points down to the water, and his toddler, 2-year-old daughter, is in the bay, is in the waters. Yeah. And it was very clear that he needed to go to the rescue. So he actually jumped in, and he ended up rescuing her and really saving her life. And to think that, and she lived, and that, she ended up being flown to shock trauma and everything else, but she lived. And so here you see a hero, a local hero, and I thought, wouldn't this be terrific to have him honored in the Senate chamber? And that's exactly what we did. It was still during the time where we were wearing masks on the Senate floor. But we were able to in person do this, whereas before we would not have been able to honor him last session. We were able to honor him this session on the Senate chamber floor. And I have to tell you, I think everybody teared up. And it was one of those moments that you were in a position to have someone recognized who truly deserved that recognition. A real highlight.
And he was someone who didn't come forward at first. He didn't want any recognition. He was really embarrassed by it. But it's been properly dispensed to him.
We actually, I think it was finally, the Ocean City Fire Department, Ryan Whittington working very closely with him, saying, look, they're going to figure this out. Why don't you just come forward and tell your story? People want to know. And so that's exactly right. He's one of the most humble people I've ever met. So to be able to have him recognized in the Maryland Senate, for that heroic action truly was a highlight, not only of this session, but certainly of my time in the Senate.
So any unusual things happen in this session?
Actually, I did term part of this session as unusual. When you have to take a COVID test every week before they will even allow you to walk onto the Senate floor, and you have to show your negative result on your phone before the Maryland State Police will allow you to come on board, it prompts a certain amount of anxiety. And so Tuesday morning you have to show that negative result. And so about Monday night, I would go through, okay, what are my options? I can either do a home kit test on Monday night, or I can go Tuesday morning across the street from the State House where the Anne Arundel had set up the testing, the Anne Arundel Health Department with the Maryland Department of Health, and you could do your test that morning and find out your result maybe 20 minutes before you are scheduled to be on the Senate floor at 10 o'clock. I found that when I first started to do those Tuesday morning tests, it was too much anxiety because you're literally waiting for the result, not knowing if you're going to be able to go onto the Senate floor and to continue to do your work. And so I then opted to start doing just paying myself for a home kit, testing that night, taking a picture of the result, and then you would show the result to the Maryland State Police when you would come in. And that took some relief off of the process for me. But when you think about it, it is unusual that just to be able to do your job, to go to work, that you're doing this test, you're showing the result, and then they're allowing you to go to work. And the reason I really am grateful to God and grateful that I just did not have COVID during session, because it really would have impacted what I could do for my constituents, because you would not be allowed on the Senate floor for 5 days. You could not go and participate in your committee hearings, and it just made it far more difficult to work on your legislation and to respond to constituents. So I'm glad that I was able to stay healthy, but it was an unusual way to do so.
What's the level of tension like between the parties in Annapolis? We see on the national level, it seems like all-out war. I don't get the same feeling from the State House, but maybe I'm wrong.
So when I compared the national and the state levels and how the parties work together, I do think it's more divisive at the national level for sure. At the state level, what tends to happen is you have some agreed upon initiatives that are bipartisan. So several of the local bills that I talked to you about, even though like my shrimp fishery bill, the Firewood certification bill, those were bills that impacted at the state level, and they had overwhelming support. I think they passed both chambers unanimously.
But the Democrats aren't going to oppose it just because you're a Republican.
Exactly.
And the shore delegation is mostly Republican.
Exactly. So you have some of those issues, but then you have issues that it's much more difficult to even receive a committee vote. And the example that I'll bring up is that I had 2 bills, and both of them dealing with parental involvement, parental notification, that I introduced the bills. I thought, a good hearing on those. One of them was to increase curriculum transparency in our school systems. That was actually introduced in my own committee, and I had a hearing on it. I had parents who testified in support of it, and the committee chair never allowed that bill to come out for even a vote at the committee level. So that, to me, is the arrogance of power when you have a supermajority, that a bill that certainly deserves at least a vote is not even given that opportunity.
So wait, help me with process here real quick. So when a situation like that, you detect the chairman's not going to allow a vote on it, do you go to the chairman and plead the case? How does that work?
On that one, unfortunately, in that case, you could tell from the chair that he was not going to move the bill. And so I am very circumspect when I push on my priorities. And there were certain bills that I also had introduced that I didn't know if he was going to allow for a bill committee vote. And I pushed on those. It was very clear with the curriculum transparency bill that he was not going to allow a vote on that. I'm going to come back on that bill, but I had to actually go back to him on bills that I had introduced in the past that didn't receive a vote. One example is our Somerset County Sunday hunting bill, a local bill. Well, local bills should always have the courtesy of a committee vote.
Right.
And so we had to work very hard to make sure that bill actually received a vote in my committee.
Right,
So,
and you worked with Charles Otto on that, and how'd that turn out?
and so this was one that the only way the chair was going to allow it to move forward, where other counties have full Sunday hunting in their local jurisdictions, the only way the chair was going to allow the Sunday hunting bills for Somerset County and Dorchester and the other counties that put forward Sunday hunting bills this year is to allow Sunday hunting 30 minutes before sunrise until 10:30 in the morning. And so it was basically, it was take that or nothing. So we didn't, at least were able to make some progress on that, and at least allows for some Sunday hunting in Somerset County and those other counties that proposed Sunday hunting bills in '22.
How can your constituents in Eastern Wycomico, Worcester, and Somerset get a hold of you?
Okay, they can always go on my website, so marybethcarozza.com, and I hope they know that they'll see me out and about. So since I've been home, I've been visiting with numerous chambers of commerce. I've done some student events. A real highlight was doing the Challenger event. We just did that event, and that's always a highlight. And I will be moving around all three counties, looking forward to it, especially when I do the tours at the Veterans Memorial in Worcester County with the 5th grade students across the board, and be able to share the story of our veterans with those students.
She's our District 38 State Senator, Mary Beth Carozza, and we're thrilled she had time to be with us here today to tell us what happened in Annapolis in the 90 days in the winter. So thanks for being here, Mary Beth.
Thank you.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. Another edition of One-on-One right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and One-on-One. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.